St. David's lies on the coast and is the smallest city in England. Today best known for its role in the early Celtic Church as the birthplace and pilgrimage destination of St. David. Its site as a religious hotspot, though, is one that goes far earlier than the 500s. Ancient standing stones and menhirs dot the landscape. Neolithic tombs to this day stand upright throughout the countryside. Wales has been occupied by Homo sapiens since 31,000 BCE, although our Neanderthal cousins inhabited the same lands 200,000 years before that. Located a little over 200 kilometers from the famous stones at Stonehenge, it should come as no surprise that Neolithic ruins are seen throughout the land of Western Wales. However, in this video, our attention now turns to the structures not half buried in the rolling hills, but those erected, destroyed, lost, and found again, this time underneath the sea. Though the city of St. David's is best known for its cathedral, the people there are best known as fishermen. Located directly on the coast of St. George's Channel, which divides Wales and Ireland, fishing has been a vital way of life and survival for the community there for as long as the coast has been there. And where there are fishermen, there are countless tall tales, legends, and sailors' yarns among them. One of these, however, has persisted throughout the generations: the Smalls. The Smalls are a grouping of rock islands 20 miles off the coast, today best known for its lighthouse and for being the westernmost point of Wales. The Smalls, so the fisherman tale goes, are one of the best fishing spots for cod, haddock, and historically herring. Whoever makes the journey out there would return with their nets full. However, the bounty there comes with a warning. Do not make the journey west on either of the solstices. Those who do would be guaranteed to have their ships crashed upon the rocky outcrops and never return, forever doomed to sink to whatever lies below the water. The story is one of the many local legends that gives the communities of the United Kingdom its charm, but an interesting one for having persisted as long as it has. The first written recording of the story dates to the 1600s, though it doubtless existed long before it was first written down. That all changed on March 6, 1975, when the local legend suddenly became so much more. Owen Pritchard had taken his ship near the Smalls in search of a catch. However, this trip would be different than all the other ones before. The local fisherman, Mr. Pritchard, was one of the first in his region to install a sonar-based fish finder on his ship, a more effective and modern way to make your catch than relying on old wives' tales. Near the Smalls, though, he noticed something no one in thousands of years had seen before: a near perfectly concentric circle on the seafloor. The striking shape seemed to him impossible to be natural, and when word spread of his discovery, many thought he stumbled on some part of one of the many ships which had sunk near these waters. Further investigation and divings would reveal it to be so much more. To learn the history of Mr. Pritchard's discovered ruins, we first need to learn about the history of Doggerland. Doggerland is a now submerged landmass which used to stretch across much of northern Europe. Connecting Ireland to the UK and the UK to France, Germany, and Denmark, the whole of northern Europe for thousands of years used to be a single landmass that you could walk across. However, as the last ice age ended, a series of floods swept across the low-lying plains of Doggerland, succumbing those lands beneath the waves. Humans inhabited Doggerland until the end. Much like the rest of Europe, hunter-gatherer tribes wandered the landscape in search of migrating megafauna and unharvested wild plants. Those who lived during the construction of the Smalls ruins were as modern as you and I. Their lives were rich and full, and they experienced the same loves and fears that we do today. They had religion and faith and grieved their dead in elaborate burials. They made art and told stories of their ancestors and of the great deeds they had done. And for the purpose of this story, they built huge monuments too. Divers curious to investigate Mr. Pritchard's discovery were quick to discover further. What they found shocked them. 52 meters below the waves was a concentric ring of 24 6 to 8 foot tall monoliths, arranged in what originally comprised 6 post and lintel arrangements. Lloyd Hopkin, the first diver to see the structure in thousands of years, reported when he surfaced, quote, Those cavemen must have been damn good at holding their breath. Archaeologists, however, had an alternate hypothesis: the lost Stonehenge of now succumbed Doggerland. The comparison to Stonehenge is an apt one. Both structures were made with vertical sarsen standing stones, topped by connecting horizontal lintel stones, originally held in place with mortise and tenon joints. Both were constructed by peoples of similar culture. Both required man-hours in the thousands to create, indicating a cohesive and organized society. And, given the position of the stones, it has been proposed that the Doggerland stones were also aligned with the solstices. This, however, is impossible to validate, both to its depth underwater and its ultimate deconstruction. While it is unlikely that a megalithic structure similar to Stonehenge would have been able to survive upright underwater for the estimated 9,000 years since its sinking, archaeologists do not believe that the Doggerland hedge collapsed after millennia of currents, shifting sands, and gentle water erosion. Such a gradual and natural destruction would have resulted in the stones playing out in all directions on the ocean floor. Instead, we find a carefully deconstructed site, preserving its original symmetry and layout. Let us go back to the sinking of Doggerland and the role that the stone monument may have played among the people who lived there. With each stone weighing an estimated 16 tons, it boggles the mind to imagine the amount of effort and coordinated effort that it took Stone Age people to construct this site. For what purpose might have they devoted so much work into? Like Stonehenge, it surely must have been a site of generational amazement. Just like the centuries of medieval peasants who pilgrimaged to the cathedral at St. David's, the Doggerland hedge must have been a site of common gathering, perhaps for the purpose of trade or worship or both. It is also likely no coincidence that the site of the Doggerland hedge lies so close to one of the few rock outcrops that still perch above the waves of the Celtic Sea. Although we can only see the tip, the island goes to the surface of the sea floor, to a land that until very recently was roamed by mammoths and men. As one of the few high points which survived the approaching waves, perhaps this rocky hill was a location well known by those who constantly wandered the terrain looking for their next meal. Perhaps it was for this reason they decided to build their monument where they did, in a place of common knowledge. The Smalls Islands may have been one of the most visible landmarks for miles around. This then brings us to the deconstruction of the Doggerland hedge. While the sinking of Doggerland was a process that occurred slowly, it was not one that took place over the hundreds of thousands to millions of years that we usually associate with geological processes. It was one that occurred over hundreds to thousands of years. While still a long time, it was one in which the change could be seen over the course of a human life. It was certainly one which could be monitored or recorded in the oral traditions of generations. What are we then to make of the purposeful and careful deconstruction of the hedge? Allow me to indulge in imagining one possible version of that story. The people who visited the hedge over the course of their lives would have been able to record the constantly approaching seashore to their sacred site. Perhaps their elders would tell stories, taught to them by their elders in turn when they were children, that once they could not even see the waves from where they stood. But now they could. The waves would not stop coming, and for a site so central and monumental, such a change must have been noticed and recorded. They must have wondered when the waves would stop. But the waves would not stop, not until they reached their present-day shores and all of Doggerland was underwater. One generation of leaders must have had an incredibly difficult choice. It was a decision that their parents and grandparents had wrestled with, but one where they ultimately chose inaction. Inaction was no longer an option. The shore was closer than ever now. Their grandparents told them that when they were young, only the strongest hunters could throw a rock from the hedge and have it land in the water. Now even the children and the weakest elders could splash rocks into the sea. Their parents had hoped the waters would stop. They must stop, but they did not. It was clear that the waves would be lapping at the stones their ancestors erected within their lifetime. They must act. It was a difficult decision to put the stones to rest. They had grown up hearing the stories of the heroes who erected them, giants who plucked them off distant cliffs and placed them on the earth. And now it was their turn to gently bury them. They wrapped ropes around the pillars in a similar manner to how the rocks were first hewn from where they were carved. With heaves from the most worthy men and women of all the tribes that visited the sacred site, each stone was pulled down. They were rearranged to maintain a sense of the original structure, if viewed from above. Perhaps shamans performed the same burial rituals that they did on their own dead, sprinkling ochre and herbs over the stones, while muttering the holy words of their now long-dead language. Did these people shed tears when the first laps of the waves reached their site? What about when it was fully inundated, visible only at low tide? When it was fully underwater? Hundreds or thousands of years after the deconstruction, did the strongest of their tribes ever consider it a badge of honor if you could swim out to the site and dive down to actually touch the stones? Would the young apprentices of holy men have rites of passages where they needed to repeat the sacred words over the stones again, this time while holding their breath? If so, then at one point they must have stopped. Real memories of a specific site became mere stories of one. Over generations around the campfire, stories became legends that were increasingly disjointed from the truth. Eventually, all that remained of the people and their sacred site was a fisherman's tale. Strange and dangerous things happened to those who fish near the smalls. This has been a work of fiction. I'm going to make sure I call that out in the description and the comments. I don't want to do my part to adding to misinformation in archaeology, of which there's plenty. But the last Stonehenge of Doggerland is a work of fiction. While Doggerland was obviously real, and it is likely that there were some standing stones similar to the thousands found in the lands that were not flooded, no megalithic monuments have been discovered.